My heart pounded so fiercely in that frozen moment that I could barely register the shock. "I sold your mountain lodge to pay my gambling debts." My stepdad's voice, dripping with derision and mirth, echoed through the phone, shattering my world in an instant. I stood in the dim light of my living room, tears welling in my eyes as disbelief and betrayal collided. The mountain lodge, my sanctuary since childhood, the very place where I'd spent endless summers with family, where I'd built memories of laughter and solace, was gone, disposed of like a cheap trinket to settle his debts. His laughter, cruel and mocking, still rings in my ears. And then, in the silence that followed his call, I realized that what he'd done was only the beginning of a nightmare that would force me to fight for everything I held dear. I never expected my stepdad, Harold, to spiral into the depths of gambling addiction, but over the years his bouts of reckless behavior had grown more frequent. As a child, I adored him. He was a rugged man with a booming laugh and a seemingly endless supply of wild stories about his youth in the mountains. He was the one who first showed me the beauty of nature, taking me on hikes through misty pine forests and teaching me how to fish in the sparkling streams that wound around our family's property. The mountain lodge, nestled high in the Rockies, had been our family retreat for decades, a legacy passed down by my late grandfather, a symbol of stability and tradition. For years, I had believed that the lodge would remain a cherished haven, a constant in a rapidly changing world. I had often visited it with a sense of pride and nostalgia, even when life's burdens weighed heavily on my shoulders. It was where I'd gone after heartbreak, where I'd found solace when I felt lost in the chaos of growing up. I had planned to someday inherit it fully, to restore it and perhaps even turn it into a small bed and breakfast to honor my grandfather's memory. Instead, one chilly autumn afternoon I received that call, a call that would upend everything. The conversation with Harold was disjointed and surreal. At first I thought he must be joking. "Dad, please, this isn't funny," I pleaded, my voice trembling as I tried to coax him into explaining. But he only laughed, a mirthless sound that made my blood run cold. "I had to, kiddo," he said with a nonchalant shrug. "The debts were piling up. I made a deal and I sold the lodge. It wasn't personal, it was business." His casual tone contrasted sharply with the gravity of his words. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. In a single phone call, the heart of my family's legacy had been liquidated to feed his addiction. I hung up the phone as if it burned my hand, my mind reeling with shock and sorrow. The next few days were a haze of numbness and disbelief. I spent hours poring over old photographs of the lodge, the faded image of my grandfather smiling beside the front door, the snapshots of me as a child laughing in the great outdoors, and I felt an ache so deep I thought I might collapse. I confronted my stepdad when he came home that evening, my voice wavering with anger. "How could you do this?" I demanded, my eyes brimming with tears. But Harold only mumbled incoherently, his guilt masked by a stubborn defiance that left me feeling more isolated than ever. The fallout was immediate. My mother, who had always tried to hold the family together, was inconsolable. She blamed herself for not intervening sooner, her grief mingling with a simmering anger toward Harold. I found myself caught in the middle of a bitter family conflict. Relatives began to take sides, some accusing me of being too soft on him in the past, others urging me to let go of the lodge and focus on moving forward. Yet, to me, the lodge was more than just property, it was a repository of memories, a symbol of my heritage and identity. And now it had been sold, vanished into thin air, all to satisfy my stepdad's gambling debts. I sat down one sleepless night, the silence of my empty apartment echoing my inner turmoil. I flipped through bank statements, legal documents, and old letters, trying to understand how something so precious could be lost so easily. I discovered that Harold had used a complex network of intermediaries to conceal the sale, shell companies, offshore accounts, the works. It was as if he had planned this betrayal with the precision of a con artist, leaving me no chance to intervene. My heart pounded with a mix of fury and profound sadness. I felt betrayed not just by him, but by the entire system that allowed greed and addiction to obliterate the legacy of a man I once admired. I realized then that I had to act. I couldn't let this injustice go unanswered. With a determination born of both grief and a fierce need for justice, I contacted a lawyer, one who specialized in estate and property law. Miss Carter was recommended by a close friend, and from our first conversation her compassion and expertise shone through. She listened intently as I recounted the events, her eyes narrowing in concentration as she considered my options. "We may have a case to challenge the sale," she said quietly. "If you can prove that the lodge was sold without your consent and that it was part of the family inheritance, We might be able to reverse the transaction or recover some of the funds. Her words, though not a guarantee, ignited a spark of hope within me, a hope that maybe, just maybe, I could reclaim what was rightfully ours. I began gathering evidence, reaching out to distant relatives who might remember the original deed, and combing through old records of the lodge's history. I discovered that the lodge had been in the family for generations, a tangible link to my grandfather's legacy, with an established history in local archives and even mentions in a small newspaper series about historic properties in the Rockies. Every scrap of paper, every faded photograph, became a piece of the puzzle that I was determined to put back together. I visited the county clerk's office, scouring through records, and I even managed to obtain a copy of the sale agreement that Harold had signed, a document that revealed glaring irregularities, including the absence of my signature and the suspicious involvement of third parties. The legal battle was arduous and draining. Ms. Carter explained that the case would likely drag on for months, maybe even years, and that the financial toll of litigation could be significant. But the lodge was too important to simply let it slip away. It was more than a building, it was a symbol of my heritage, of the family values that had been corrupted by Harold's reckless behavior. I also feared that if I did nothing, my stepdad's actions might set a dangerous precedent, encouraging similar betrayals in other families. With a heavy heart and a steely resolve, I decided to pursue the case, even as I navigated the emotional labyrinth of betrayal and grief. Throughout the legal proceedings, I found myself revisiting memories of the lodge. I recalled the summer evenings spent on its porch, the laughter of family gatherings, the comforting warmth of a fire in the stone fireplace during winter. These memories fueled my determination. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see my grandfather's proud smile and hear my own laughter echoing off the mountains. I had to honor that legacy even if it meant challenging my stepdad in court. I wrote long letters to Miss Carter, detailing every conversation, every vague remark from Harold about needing money, every time he had tried to avoid discussing the lodge's future. I combed through old emails, texts, and voicemails, piecing together a timeline that showed a clear pattern of deceit and avoidance. As the case unfolded, tensions in the family reached a boiling point. My mother, once the glue that held us together, was caught between her love for Harold and her grief over the lost lodge. She visited me frequently, tears in her eyes, begging me to let it go, to forgive him for his mistakes. "He was weak, dear," she would say softly. "I wish he had been stronger, more responsible. Please don't let this tear our family apart." But I could not ignore the deep wound his actions had inflicted. I had trusted him with our family legacy, and he had repaid that trust with betrayal and reckless indulgence. My resolve hardened with each tear and every bitter word of admonishment. In the courtroom, I often felt a mixture of dread and empowerment. The legal jargon, the cold scrutiny of judges and lawyers, sometimes overwhelmed me, but each step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of my shattered identity. Witnesses testified about the lodge's history, the irregularities in the sale, and the undeniable fact that I had never consented to Harold's actions. The turning point came when a longtime family friend, who had once been a guest at many gatherings at the lodge, took the stand. With a quivering voice, she recounted the cherished memories of the lodge and how it had always been a symbol of continuity in our family. Her testimony painted a vivid picture of a home that was far more than bricks and mortar. It was the heart of our family legacy. As the months wore on, the legal battle became a crucible in which I discovered strengths I had never known I possessed. I learned to channel my grief and anger into determination, each court date a step closer to reclaiming what was lost. My nights were filled with long hours of reading, strategizing with Miss Carter, and even moments of quiet reflection where I allowed myself to feel the sorrow of my shattered past. I began to document every detail in a journal, not only as evidence for the case but as a personal catharsis, a way to transform my pain into power. Each entry was a testament to my resilience, a promise that I would not let Harold's reckless choices define the rest of my life. In one particularly harrowing hearing, I was forced to recount the moment of the phone call that shattered my world. The courtroom was silent as I described the shock and humiliation I felt when I heard those words, a betrayal so stark that it seemed impossible to believe. The judge listened intently, her eyes softening with compassion as I spoke. I felt as though I was not just fighting for the lodge, but for my own self-worth, for the dignity that had been ripped from me in that single, callous moment. The testimony stirred something in the judge, and she remarked that the evidence painted a tragic picture of a man who had lost everything to his vices, leaving behind a trail of devastation that now demanded restitution. Meanwhile, in the background of this legal storm, the community rallied in unexpected ways. Local historians who had long admired the mountain lodge for its rustic charm and historical significance came forward to support my claim. They provided affidavits attesting to the lodge's value, not just monetarily but as a cultural and familial treasure. Their words, filled with passion and reverence, bolstered my case and reminded me that some things are worth fighting for no matter the cost. I began to see the battle for the lodge not merely as a personal vendetta against Harold, but as a stand for preserving our heritage, a symbol of integrity in a world increasingly marred by greed and recklessness. The emotional toll was immense. There were nights when I would lie awake, haunted by memories of the lodge's laughter-filled halls and the silence that had replaced them after Harold's betrayal. I felt isolated, estranged from a family that seemed to have accepted his version of events, their voices a confusing chorus of both pity and indifference. My mother, torn between her love for her husband and the reality of his actions, oscillated between regret and resignation. I received countless messages from distant relatives, some offering their support, others urging me to forgive and move on. But I knew that forgiveness would not come easily, nor would it erase the scars etched into my heart. In time, the court finally issued a ruling in my favor. The sale of the lodge was declared null and void, and a temporary injunction was placed on any further transactions. More importantly, the final judgment recognized my rightful claim to a substantial portion of the lodge's value, and it mandated that Harold reimburse the estate for the losses incurred through his actions. The verdict was a bittersweet victory, a legal triumph that validated my pain and restored a measure of justice, yet it could not undo the years of betrayal and the family rift that now lay like a wound between us. After the hearing, I returned home to an empty house that once rang with laughter and now echoed with silence. I stood on the porch, looking out at the rugged mountains that had always been a symbol of stability and strength, and I felt a surge of determination. The lodge, though temporarily saved from sale, represented more than just property. It was a testament to my resilience, a symbol of the legacy my grandfather had built and that I would now protect at all costs. I resolved that I would restore it, not necessarily to its former glory, but to a state that honored its history and the values of hard work and integrity it represented. I envisioned turning it into a retreat for troubled souls, a sanctuary where people could find solace and healing, just as I had begun to heal from my own wounds. Over the following months, I threw myself into the painstaking process of restoring the mountain lodge. I visited the site frequently, overseeing repairs, selecting new furnishings, and even relearning the art of rustic charm that my grandmother had once perfected. I negotiated with contractors, scoured antique shops for authentic pieces, and even enlisted the help of local craftsmen who shared my vision. With each small improvement, the freshly painted walls, the repaired wooden floors, the newly planted wildflowers, I felt a little of the weight of betrayal lift. The lodge became a metaphor for my own rebirth, a physical manifestation of the new life I was determined to build despite the scars of the past. In the midst of this rebuilding, I began to forge new relationships, ones that were rooted in honesty and mutual respect. I reconnected with old friends who had stood by me through the darkest days, and I even began dating again, cautiously stepping into a world where trust was a precious commodity. Each new connection was approached with an openness tempered by the lessons I had learned, a determination to never again allow someone to diminish my worth. The process of rebuilding the lodge was both therapeutic and transformative. I discovered that the physical act of restoration had a profound effect on my emotional well-being. With every nail hammered, every brushstroke applied, I was reclaiming not just a building, but a piece of myself that had been lost in the chaos of betrayal. The local community began to take notice, praising the revival of a cherished landmark, and soon the lodge became a symbol of resilience in the area, a beacon of hope that even the deepest wounds could be healed with time, effort, and unwavering determination. Through all of this, I remained in close contact with Miss Carter, my lawyer, who ensured that Harold's attempts to reverse the court's decision were met with swift legal action. He tried to appeal the ruling, claiming that his actions were driven by desperation and that the sale had been a legitimate business move. But every appeal was met with solid evidence of fraud, and with each setback, his facade crumbled further. I heard whispers that he was struggling to find stability in his new life, that the reckless freedom he'd sought had left him isolated and penniless. While a part of me felt a pang of pity, it was quickly overshadowed by the satisfaction of knowing that justice, however delayed, had prevailed. One evening, as I sat on the newly refurbished porch of the mountain lodge, watching the sun set over the rugged peaks, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The pain of that fateful phone call, the anguish of losing not just my husband but the future we'd planned together, had all culminated in this moment of quiet triumph. I realized that every betrayal, every hurtful word, had forced me to discover an inner strength I never knew I possessed. I was no longer defined by the cruelty of others. I was defined by my own ability to rise, rebuild, and reclaim my life. I began hosting small gatherings at the lodge, intimate retreats for friends, a place where people could come together to share stories of resilience and healing. These gatherings slowly helped mend the fractures within me, turning a symbol of betrayal into a sanctuary of hope. Each shared laugh, every supportive word exchanged under the starlit sky, reaffirmed my belief that even the darkest chapters can give way to a new dawn. As the months turned into a year, I officially took control of the lodge, establishing it as a non-profit retreat dedicated to helping individuals recover from personal loss and trauma. I poured my heart into the project, channeling every ounce of pain into creating a space of renewal. Volunteers, donors, and even some of the local community rallied behind my vision. The lodge became not just a home for healing, but a monument to the fact that even when everything is taken away, you can rebuild a future that shines with the light of your own resilience. Now, as I sit in the quiet of my restored lodge, with the crisp mountain air filling my lungs and the sound of a gentle stream in the distance, I feel a deep, abiding peace. The scars of betrayal still mark my soul, reminders of a time when my trust was shattered. But they no longer hold me captive. Instead, they fuel my commitment to live authentically and fiercely. I have learned that even in the face of the most profound hurt, you can find the strength to rebuild, not just a home but a life enriched by your own determination and self-worth. I look back on that devastating phone call with a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. Sorrow for the love that was lost and the dreams that were shattered, but gratitude for the awakening it brought, a realization that I had the power to rewrite my story. I am now the architect of my own destiny, the keeper of a legacy that no one can steal from me. Every day, I honor the memory of my family's heritage by nurturing the lodge, by creating a space where others can find solace, and by continuing to grow in the face of adversity. My journey from heartbreak to healing was not easy. It was marked by long nights of tears, painful legal battles, and a profound reevaluation of what love and trust truly meant. But I stand here today resilient and empowered, with a future that is unmistakably mine. A future where I am the sole author of my story, unburdened by the selfish choices of others. In reclaiming the lodge, I reclaimed my identity, my dignity, and my hope. And that, above all else, is a victory that no one can take away.